Welcome to Burning the Couch with Pim and Micaela. Although we are licensed therapists, please note that information in this podcast should not replace psychotherapy, clinical supervision, or be taken as legal or medical advice.
Privacy is important to us, so all people, places, and scenarios mentioned in this podcast have been changed to protect client confidentiality. Also, we don't condone literally burning your couch. And a special thanks and shout out to C-Cop Studios for the awesome music we're using in this podcast.
It's Spooktober, everybody. Can we believe it? I love this season. I don't know about you, but I'm all about the pumpkin spice stuff. Pumpkin everything, pretty much. My house is full of it.
Pim's a basic pumpkin spice latte lover. I am too.
Totally
though.
am.
I am too. I'm guilty of it. I have all the different kinds of creamers at home. So
yeah, I was really
pumped.
sad. I texted Micaela the other day and I just said, I'm sad. And she was concerned. And
I thought it was
said
something like really serious and like drastic. And she's like,
it was
Trader Joe's is out of everything.
It was a 911 call. Trader Joe's was out of all the pumpkin spice stuff. I stocked up. I bought 2 of everything, but I had run out. So I was like, okay, there's a couple of weeks left in October. I'm just going to go and get whatever they have left, but they were all out.
I know you have to get there early, but we're in San Diego. So it is just now starting to feel a little bit like fall in the afternoons and evenings. It's cooling off, but again, we're going to have like an 80-degree weekend. So
yeah,
you have to it doesn't feel like we're ready to buy pumpkin things yet, but we're behind.
I love it. Justin thought I was crazy because he came home to I think it was pumpkin Alfredo sauce, pumpkin batons, pumpkin waffles, pumpkin pretzels, pumpkin chocolate.
Well, girl, that's why Trader Joe's is sold out. You already bought everything. I do have my fall candle in the background, so I'm for it.
We're
as
ready.
Well.
And I love Halloween, so it's Spooktober. Okay, so we're going to be talking about self-disclosure today. And now everybody knows how much I love pumpkins and pumpkin spice season. So that's great. That was self-disclosure. We're done.
And I think, this is a good topic. I'm excited about this topic because for so long in school, in traineeships, we're taught that self-disclosure is something to avoid. It's not good, or you have to use it very sparingly, right? And use it very strategically, which is true to an extent, but it's almost like having to unlearn this rule of self-disclosure being bad in therapy sessions.
Yeah, I remember as part of my traineeship going in, it was very different from what we had learned in school because I could remember very clearly being taught, just, if a client asks if you're married or if you have kids or how old you are, you kind of answer back with some kind of reflection on, I'm curious what made you ask that, right? And in my first week of traineeship, right, we were working with kids and teens, and I had done something like that. And they're like, why are you asking such a weird question?
Right. Because that's not to ask, a little bit about our life isn't a weird thing. I think it's really valid too for clients to want to know, hey, how old are you? Or what's your story? What's your deal? Right. Are you married, or are you in recovery, or how can you help me? And I think those are really valid questions that clients ask. And you have to be careful with those reflecting back questions because sometimes they don't land.
Oh, for sure. And, in my own experience too, I feel like when I meet with professionals who self disclose a little bit, I tend to feel more comfortable with them. It makes me feel like they're a real human being, right? So I've had a doctor once that was like, oh, I have a daughter that's just your age. She's going to grad school. And if it was my own daughter, I would recommend this and this as well. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it makes me feel better.
Right. And I mean, even my doctor, he like talks about his mom going on walks and how he goes to the gym with his daughter. And like, I love that. And so often when you think of therapy, whether it be in movies, on TV, even in your first semester of grad school, maybe, it's this idea that we are this blank canvas. We show no emotion. We don't tell anything about our lives. Don't put pictures up in your office. Don't wear a wedding ring. Like all of these things to make us so inhuman and unreal. And I think it kind of comes back to that old school, maybe psychoanalytic, like you're sitting on a couch facing this wall and not even looking at the therapist.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just not how it is. And that's, I mean, burn that couch, right? We're burning that couch. Therapy doesn't always look like that. It doesn't have to look like that.
It can look like that. I don't want to
Sure.
discredit
Yeah, exactly.
people that are doing psychoanalytic work and hypnosis and all that stuff. It's great. And that's just not all of it.
Right. It doesn't have to look like that. And that I think we'll get to as well. It depends on the type of therapy you're doing.
Yeah. So what kind of things, Michaela, do you feel like people get asked about a lot? I guess there's many different areas that self-disclosure can occur.
Yeah, I think, well, we've talked about this earlier in our season, whether you're in recovery or not, especially if you're working with addiction, that's something that 1000% will be asked of you. um,
Mm-hmm.
do you have an addiction or have you been in treatment before? Or are you in recovery? So that one's hard because you can't really bullshit that one either. Uh, so that's a tough one. That one I've gotten asked quite a bit. I've also gotten asked about, especially earlier in my traineeship and internships of, do you have kids? Are you married? I think especially being like a younger therapist, parents like to ask that. You have tons of experience with that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Right.
tons.
I don't get asked that very often anymore, but asking about your own family, I don't know what else. What are you asked a lot too, or common
I
things?
think, here's what I've noticed. Because I went to grad school, I started grad school at 21. So I was very, very young. And I was in traineeship at 22 and then, started working as an associate at 23. And so I would get asked so often because I worked with kids, like, do you have kids? Are you married? All of these questions. And I used to be very self-conscious about those questions and feel taken aback by it. And I don't know if it's because I am older now, I'm 28, or if it's because I've really gained confidence in myself as a clinician and I know that I'm good at what I do and like that I have an ongoing wait list and people are referred to me. And I don't know if it's because of that it's the vibe that I'm putting off that I don't get asked that anymore. So I'm not sure like if it's because I'm older or it's just like I'm showing the confidence in like, I'm Dr. Manisha McGuire. These are my specialties. Do you want to set up a consult? Boom, boom, boom. Like maybe because clients see that and they're like, oh, she knows what she's doing versus me as a trainee or as an associate, knowing
Being
that I'm young,
unsure
being
of your,
unsure myself, which then makes clients ask.
yeah. And maybe it's a little bit of both. I think that's true. Also, just being something that I've noticed is just being in my own private practice. There is this level of, mm, there is this level of confidence, right? Of people are reaching out to me, they are scheduling with me, And, you know, it's not like I'm trying to find the words to even explain it. But I feel like when you're working for a company, sometimes there's this pressure of I have to prove that I'm a good fit. And when you're in your own private practice, it's kind of like, this is what I do. And I'm either for
Take
you
it or leave it.
or I'm not for you. Right. I don't have to, I think sometimes there's a pressure of, I know we're getting a little off topic, but there's this pressure of I want my bosses or my superiors, the company to know that I'm an asset and that I work well with clients and I'm a good fit for a lot of clients. Whereas now that we're both very specialized in what we do, there's not a need to prove it to anybody, right?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of comes with the confidence too. Is like I don't have to prove anything. This is what I do.
Mm-hmm. And I've always felt confident in answering that because I didn't see a point to lie. Right. So I've always said, like, no, I'm not married and no, I don't have kids. And right now as well, if they ask me if I have kids, I always say, no, I don't have kids. I feel pretty okay saying that and pretty confident in it. I think in terms of mental health, clients have never asked me, I don't think, have you ever struggled with depression or anxiety like that? It's more me choosing to disclose as examples or when needed with certain clients only. So I myself struggle a lot with anxiety and perfectionism. I'm pretty transparent with some of the teens that I work with who struggle with perfectionism. I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a perfectionist. But, at least to my colleagues and my close family and friends, but I use it in terms of to normalize the experience of like, it's not a bad thing. This is a thing that has been ingrained in us since we were kids. And it's something that was positively reinforced or things like that, just to normalize the experience and to also let clients know that, this is something that like we all kind of work through. I would say sometimes I would say things more general, like a lot of us struggle with depression, anxiety. I don't say like me or,
Right.
Something like that. But I've never gotten asked directly. I don't think. I have maybe 2 clients that have asked, do you incorporate spirituality and religion in your therapy practice, but never directly asked me what my religious or spiritual preferences are. And then I've had one family specifically request, this was during 2016 with the really crazy elections and whatnot. I did have one family that was like, we would appreciate that when you work with our team to take an open-minded approach, or they worded it in a very good way of like, don't take just what the media says, because that's what all teens are listening to. We want the team to be able to think for themselves and have idea about both fronts or something like that. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But I've never had anyone ask me directly, I think.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I've done something similar of just kind of broad, when I feel anxious about X, Y, and Z, right? Those kinds of instances. And, one thing to even note is like on Psychology Today or any kind of platform where you're advertising, sometimes they will even have opportunities for you to share, right? Are you part of the LGBT community?
Yeah. They
do you
filter.
do you have a certain spiritual background that, you bring into the therapy room? Or I'm trying to think of other ones, religion and, or sometimes there's
Race,
people who are
ethnicity,
specifically,
culture.
exactly. Or, your how you identify, right? Do you identify as non-binary, right? There are people who are seeking non-binary therapists specifically. So those kinds of things you can even put as this is the type of therapist I am to cater to certain populations. So I think that's awesome because again, there are certain things that clients are looking for, and they're able to find that now easier versus like meet with therapists, get to a certain point, and then like ask and then be shut down by why do you think that why do you think that's important? Like,
Yeah.
obviously, right? We
Yeah.
don't need to do
Oh,
that anymore. So
now that I think about it, when you said like LGBTQ community, I have had a couple of consultations that I've had that are people in the community who have asked me very straightforwardly, are you part of the LGBT community? Because that's important to me, right? And I get that if they want to know, and if you're not, that's okay. You know, you can say that you're an ally. If you are, I hope you are. And for me, I do identify as part of the community, and I share that with my clients. But I think in its own way, because I am in a seemingly heterosexual marriage with a cis white male, that has its own issues, you know, of clients being like, are you lying and whatnot. But I do answer questions if it is directed to me, because I do think that when you're trying to you know, deflect in any way, clients can see straight through that. It's the same as if we were to ask direct questions to other professionals and they deflect. We know, and we feel like we already feel off put by it and like, oh, okay, I don't know about this person because they're not being real with me.
yeah, and that comes to the point of how important the relationship is in therapy and building that rapport. You know, if you're not willing, and not saying you have to disclose things you're not comfortable disclosing, right? You might be part of a certain community or a certain religion, and you might not want to disclose that, and that is absolutely fine. And that's something that I even bring to clients, right? I was like, you could feel free to ask. I may or may not answer, right? I've even said that. Like, I might answer you. And if, you know, I don't feel like I want to share that, I might not. So,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean you can't ask.
Yeah.
I'm open to you asking, and I'll let you know.
Yeah.
And same for you, right? That's the relationship, is like, if I ask you something and you're not ready to talk about it, yeah, you can say
Right.
that.
I think that's a good point that you brought that up, because it's this we're not trying to say like you have to answer all of the clients' questions. Of course, if you have clients, we could definitely have clients that push some boundaries, right? And if you're not comfortable answering something, don't. But we're just trying to help you unlearn what they teach us in grad school of not saying anything at all.
Right. It's so specific to who you are as a therapist, who your clients are, the modality you're working within, the setting you're even working in, right? All of these things play a role in sharing about your own life, but it can be a really cool opportunity. You know, especially when you're working with like kids, like you have to give them something. You have to show, like, you can speak to this as well, Pim, like for sure. But you share, you know, what video games you're playing, and, you know, perfectionistic things that you experience, like with school. Like, you are able to relate in those ways, which is so powerful. And, you know, I think remembering that it's the relationship that is one of the biggest factors in helping people change and the progression of treatment, right? It's not necessarily all of these different fancy interventions. It's really the relationship. So if you can nurture that and foster it by giving a little piece of what you're like to do that, I think it's powerful.
Yeah, it goes a really long way, I think, because interventions and all this aren't going to land. Clients aren't, you're not going to get a buy-in if you don't have a relationship with them and have rapport with them. And especially in my experience working with kids and teens and even college students, like hearing a little bit about how you're what interests you and what you're doing, it can really help them feel connected to you. You know, sometimes I start sessions with my clients of like, instead of, hey, how was this last week? Or how have things been? And I was like, oh my goodness, so and so, I've been waiting for this session. Have you seen the new trailer for this and this video game? And they get so excited about it and start talking about it and eases them up and then we jump into whatever we have been working on. And I
Yeah.
have some clients that like are doing the same where I always ask before the end of session, we're about to wrap up. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you? And they're like, yes, off topic, but have you seen this movie?
I love it. I love it. And that I think it's thinking about not necessarily, well, it is what you're sharing, and it is also how are you sharing it, right? What is the purpose? And this is something they do talk about in school is are you what's the benefit of you sharing your own stuff or your own interests or your own experience? How is this benefiting the relationship or your client directly? And being strategic with it. So for you, like sharing interests, that's building rapport, that's maintaining like this really open relationship with your client where they're feeling like, oh, I'm excited to tell Dr. Panicha all about, what level I got on my video game or, what sci-fi book I'm reading. I can tell her about it, right? Um,
hmm
what are some other ways or I guess reasons why you would share?
Maybe normalizing would be a big one, especially when it comes to mental health, right? Or even during a COVID-19 pandemic, of just normalizing how difficult it is. And I have clients who are like, I don't have my shit together, like, especially my teens and my young adults. Like, I don't have my shit together. Like, I wake up, I'm still in PJs. It's so hard to get motivated. And I'm like, you're just seeing the top half of me. I'm actually wearing sweatpants right now.
Yes.
And just normalizing that experience with them of like, I get it. It's cold, it's chilly, everything's online, you want to sleep. I've done that before, been there. Or even things like anxiety related, perfectionism related, right? To normalize the experience. And so I think that's a big one too, but trying to be careful to not take over the session and use it as your own therapy, right? How long is this example or story that you're trying to tell the client? Is it taking up the whole time?
Right. Being mindful and you can kind of tell reading it too. Like, is your client listening? Are they into it? Or are they like, okay, I get it. Time to you can kind of see it on their face, their body language,
Mm-hmm.
if it's landing or not. And I think you mentioned a really good thing is if using it as an example, right? That's how I've used a lot of self-disclosure is it's an example of how I've maybe used a certain skill or a situation where this was helpful to look at it this way. And it shows like, yeah, I also use skills too, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
human. I'm not the most pleasant when I don't eat. And I've responded in ways that I'm like, oh, I kind of regret that, right? I'm not immune to those things. And so using it as an example of how I've used skills, I've even said things like, especially in group when I'm teaching skills groups, that's actually encouraged sometimes. Share your own experience with it. And I would always use examples about how my husband and I had this agreement about taking out the trash, and his day was Thursdays. And then, Friday morning, the trash is still there. And this is how I used my skills. So, we're human. Like this is
Yeah,
like
it's
the
to show
theme
you're
of the
human.
podcast. Yeah. And
Right.
so, but I think it gives clients ideas of like, oh, okay, that makes sense of how this person used it. Or, oh, they have a disagreement about who takes the trash out too. Okay, I can relate to that.
Exactly. Yeah, I like the skills part because I think I use it a lot in terms of teaching mindfulness too. I'm not good at guided meditation. I suck at it, and I know it takes practice, but I also don't like doing it. So I'm not going to recommend to a client like, okay, I want you to do this every single day at 5 minutes at a time. If it floats your boat, great. And if you're motivated to do it, great. But I'm honest about, I can't get myself to do it. So I'm not going to force you to do it and then get mad at you. Right. But is there
Right.
anything else that you could do? For me, yoga is my mindfulness practice, right? That's how I practice mindfulness. For me, it's walking around the block with my dog without bringing my phone, without having notifications, and use my observe and describe participate skills there. Or it's having my morning coffee without checking the news or watching TV. There's many different ways that you can incorporate mindfulness. And that's something I use with skills training as well of, I'm not going to, oh, let's journal, let's do this. Yeah, if it works for you, great. But if I was a client, I don't want to do it.
Right. And even saying like being able to normalize that experience of like, yeah, we might bring stuff up in session and it may work for you and it may not. For example, I actually hate, mindfulness or what I don't, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I hate guided
Right.
meditation specifically. And you can say that and be like, yeah, you don't have to like it. You don't have to
Yeah.
like everything.
Right.
And I don't either.
Right.
So, and I think it really does depend on the model, the theory, how you see change happening, what kind of theoretical perspective you're using and how you
Mm-hmm.
use this, right? For me, like, DBT is my baby. That's how I view the entire world now. Like I can't unsee it even when I want to. And so I use self-disclosure in strategic ways through DBT. But again, like if you are doing more psychoanalytic or psychodynamic stuff, maybe you're not. And that's okay too.
Right. Yeah. So I guess one of the things that some of our listeners might be struggling with, and something I'm constantly trying to grow in, is how to tell if self-disclosure is inappropriate or too much. I know you mentioned before you can kind of see it in their face, right? Of like, oh, this isn't landing or this is a little too much. And just as a side note, practice some self-compassion. It's okay to make mistakes as therapists. We grow from it. We learn from it.
Yeah.
But asking ourselves like, how would sharing your own like stuff, right, benefit the client? What is the purpose of this disclosure? What model you're using and what you're working from, right? How does this play a role in sessions? But something that I've learned as well is you're going to love this. This is part of mindfulness, but checking my urges, like observing my urges to self-disclose and pausing before I do so, then
I'm like so happy. I'm like, love that you said that and brought that up right now. Continue.
Yes. So checking my urges, because I might have a client who is complaining about their mom or dad or complaining about this and that. And I have this urge to have a conversation with them and be like, oh my God, that's totally happened to me too. Or I totally get that, or this and that. Like checking that urge, right? Notice what place it's coming from of like, do I just want to connect with my client? Is this really touching me in some kind of way? Then is that more about me rather than like, if I were to say this, it's going to help the client?
Yes. And I notice I do have urges around like if I have a similar experience or
Mm-hmm.
I actually currently have a client that has a very similar family conflict that I am also experiencing currently. And there's been so many times where I've been like, oh my gosh, isn't that frustrating? I totally get what you're talking about. And I do have to pause. And I think it's because it is emotionally tied to me, what they're talking about. The urge is stronger, right? That relatability. And also there's a thought of like, I want them to know how much I get it.
Yes.
I want them to feel that I feel them. And sometimes it could take away from their sharing experience if I were to barge in and be like, oh my gosh, same thing happened with my family. X, Y, and Z said X, Y, and Z, and it was a mess. It's totally disrupting their story. and taking away. And I don't know if in that moment it would have been beneficial. So I had to kind of just sit with that and, validate from a point of the therapist and not, a friend.
And it's okay to hold that too for the next session or the next session, right? So sit with that urge to share, reflect on it after the session. What would be the purpose of this, right? And if you come to find out that, okay, it won't really benefit the client in any way, great, toss it out. This is for consultation. This is for self of the therapist work. But if you find that, you know what, maybe sharing this might really benefit the client in this way, and this is how I'm going to approach it, so that we come from it. I don't want to throw DBT again, but from a wise mind perspective, right? So it's strategically placed. So in the next session that you have with a client, you can come back around to it. That way you've had some time to think about how this can be used rather than it coming from an urge per se. Something that my own personal therapist had done before, she and I was a really good fit. We were a good match because she also had like an Asian background. And I really felt like, oh my gosh, she totally gets my family dynamics. And when she self-disclosed, she would always start with, Pim, this sounds really familiar to me, and I totally understand where you're coming from. May I share with you an experience that I've had with this particular issue? So she asked for permission, right? And I loved, loved, loved that. And I would say, oh, absolutely. I would love to hear that. And it makes me feel heard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad someone gets it. And then she would weave that into back to myself and what like skills or what challenge that we're working on back to my own like therapeutic process.
Yeah. And she waited at the really appropriate time. And I think that's really cool. How did that make you feel?
It felt good. I felt I love that, and I'm also trying to incorporate that more as well. Shout out to Sarah Hirad. I'm copying you. But like I'm now using that with my clients a lot as well, like asking them, may I share something with you that I think might be helpful or beneficial to you? Or may I share an experience of mine in this moment? I don't do it quite often, but in some moments where I think it's going to be therapeutic, because that was so helpful to me. And I felt like, wow, she asked for permission if it's okay for her to share something about herself and not just take over my session. But I also felt like heard, and I felt like someone understood me. It was landed in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, there's I guess you could call it the art of self-disclosure, right? And how to do it tactfully, and asking permission might be one of those ways, And I think timing is big too, because if you're going right out of the gate trying to connect so hard and just bring out all the commonalities or experiences you've had and kind of bombarding your client, right? You have to do it in a tactful way. If I give an example from my personal life, that might be the only time I do that in that one session. I'm not going to be giving every single skill an example of my own life. And I can think of an example right now of a client I had who was working on graduate school writing. And at the time, I was trying to muster up the energy to work on my dissertation proposal. And all the things like this client was bringing up, I was also at the same time experiencing. And it wasn't until the end of our time together that I even shared I was also working on something like that. And so I wanted them to have this time of our work together for the focus to be on them. And it wasn't until the end it was like, oh, they do get it, right? Micaela does get it. She's doing the same thing. And it wasn't until the end. And I strategically waited. I was like, if I ever do share that, it will be towards the end of our work together. And I'm thinking about it now, and I don't know if that was as strategic, like if I planned that out strategically, or if I just tried to withhold my urge for a while and then I shared
Yeah.
it at the end. But I think it was a nice way to kind of like wrap up our work together of like, yeah, like what we talked about, I used those skills too. So take it with you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know what the purpose of sharing that was, but I guess it's just another example of, you know, timing can be a part of it too, and using it
Mhm.
sparingly. Don't have that be your main way of connecting with clients either.
Mhm.
Um,
Right. And
but
feedback.
it's yeah, yeah,
So,
being open to feedback.
I always ask my clients periodically. It's just been a habit of mine, maybe from our time as trainees, right? We used to do those questionnaires, those anonymous ones of about the therapists and how they like their therapists and whatnot. So I always ask my clients every like couple of sessions, how are things going? How do you feel? It's almost like treatment plan review too, but I always ask like, how do you think this approach is going? Is there anything that I could do that could help you more? And some clients are like, oh, I want more skills and blah, blah. But I've actually had quite a handful of my teens who have given me the feedback and say, everything's going great. And I just love that, you're sharing some examples about like what you do and what you've done or things that were helpful for you or coming up with ideas. Like, because they've all kind of had experiences where they've had, adult therapists who they know nothing about, or their parents pick this therapist for them, and they just know nothing about this person. And so they just feel a lot more connected to me in that way. And so I've gotten really great feedback about using self-disclosure and them knowing a little bit more about me. But check in with your clients. Some clients might be not open to that or not wanting that. They want to use the full 50 minutes or 60 minutes of the session time to maybe word vomit or to, have you hold space for them and them only. I think asking for feedback periodically is good practice in general. And it might be a good time to check in regarding self disclosure and also maybe do some reflection, right, about how you're doing as a therapist.
Yeah, and I one more point I would like to make that I think is important is if you're noticing you're having a lot of urges to self-disclose, or you're noticing maybe you self-disclose a lot. That is, we talked about self with a therapist work. That is a great thing to bring into consultation, to bring into supervision. If you have like a peer consult group, bringing that stuff up of, "Hey, I'm
To
noticing I
your
have
own
a lot of,"
therapy.
in your own therapy, great point, is, I have these urges to share my experience, or I feel like I really identify with this client and I have a similar experience I want to share. I want them to know that I get it. Bring that to somebody, to a team, to a therapist, supervisor, anything like that. That is a really great opportunity to kind of delve deeper of like, where is this coming from? Why is there this urge to overshare or connect in that way?
Yeah.
It's important. Keep that shit in check. Anything else, Pim, that you want to add?
I think that's it. Let's hope Trader Joe's restock on things before October ends.
Fingers crossed. Thanks everyone for listening to Burning the Couch. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Burning the Couch. And if you have a burning question or comment, please email us at podcastbtc@gmail.com. Also, a reminder, we do have a collaboration form on our website. The link is on all of our social medias, so be sure to check that out if you're wanting to be a guest speaker or collaborate with us in some way.